All right. Okay. Well, I just recorded this whole thing and I realized my audio wasn't on, so I'm gonna have to start all over. That's okay because I'm in. I have the energy more available to me right now, so I'm gonna be a little bit more enthusiastic from the beginning. So yeah. So there's the subject that's been on my mind is forgiveness, and I think it's very important that we intend to forgive those around us, who trespass against us, you know, for whatever reason. It's like whatever wound somebody else causes us, it's not for anyone else to decide, whether that was valid or not. The thing that matters is what is it that we feel inside, and what is the truth that lives inside of us. Because sometimes when we go to explain ourselves to others, they might try to argue with the logic, and they might try to argue with the details of the experience as we convey it. Because to them, everyone has sort of their own point of view. And if they weren't walking in your particular shoes, and if they weren't targeted by that person in the same way that you were targeted by them, then they may have a hard time believing when you tell them, what, the vileness that you experience from someone that they might consider like a really, just a marvelous human being. Like, how could you feel this way about this person who I love so much and who only ever treated me with such kindness? Well, the truth of humanity is, we all have our different sides. And, I will say this truly, the truth about me is I don't treat everyone the same in my life. I'm not equally kind to everyone. And, there's some people that I'm going to be, I'm going to have no patience for them, because to me, they'll only be a parasite, or, whatever, they'll just be some obnoxious nuisance. So I'm going to dismiss them and give them less attention. And, if they try to, mess with me, I will be, very harsh with them, to defend myself. And then from their point of view, it might be, oh, he is so horrible, he abused me, or whatever. So, I understand that, you know, human nature, to everyone's going to have a different experience of people. And depending on what kind of relationship we have with them will be, how that relationship will be interpreted. So sometimes, when we go to relay our experiences, of our various relationships to others, particular others who know these people from a different point of view, they may be tempted to argue with our experience. But, what I would encourage people to do is don't argue, with a person when they're talking about their feelings, because their feelings, are the truth to them in this moment. And, feelings are an evolving thing. So, in order for feelings to change, we need to process them. And to process them, we need to express them. And to express them, sometimes we need to make errors in the way, what we present. And so, the person specifically that I want to talk about today, that I, want to forgive, but, that I sort of struggle with, and I still, find myself thinking, oh my God, this person really fucked me over. This person I'm talking about is, my grandmother back from my childhood in Germany. When when my mother passed away, I went to go live with my grandparents. I was 8 years old. And, my grandfather, it was very clear that he wanted to be there for me. He was always a loving man. He was always a kind man. He gave, out of all the people in my life from my childhood, he was there for me from the very beginning. And he was there for me in a way that made me feel like he really enjoyed his experience with me. And so, most of my experience when it was just me and my grandfather, we got along splendidly and harmoniously, because he really enjoyed, being heart to heart with me. And, it's not like he was just giving me a gift. It felt like, I was also giving him a gift, by being with him. So, of course I wanted to go live with my grandfather, and I hadn't really, and I was about to find out what it was like to live with my grandmother, unfortunately, as well, because my grandmother was completely different than my grandfather. My grandmother, she had, some really difficult circumstances in her own childhood. I believe she was often sent away, by her parents to, go stay with other people. And so she was sort of treated like she was unwanted. And, then she had some very terrible experiences during World War World War II, where she witnessed, all the people in her house, were killed. Essentially, she was like maybe the only survivor. And she saw, all these dead bodies and stuff, and, these dying people who were thirsty, for water. And, that, I think, obviously had a profoundly negative impact on her. But essentially, she never really grew up as a person, as an adult, and as an adult who's really in her relationship able to show up for the people that, loved, that she, had a relationship with. And so, she ended up with my grandfather, who, my sense of their relationship was that, it wasn't like romantic love so much. It was more like, my grandfather wanted to have a family, and, he found my grandmother, and he also felt sort of paternalistic feelings toward her. He sort of felt sympathy and empathy for her. And so he sort of, he was always somebody, I think, who felt bound to be, to those who were, uh, people who needed, extra love. And, my grandmother was clearly someone who needed extra love. And I think that moved his heart, because, he felt, because he was such a loving person, that love, wants to provide for somebody. And, what better way to provide for someone than to someone who really needs it. And so I think the reason that he ended up with my grandmother is because he sort of saw her as somebody who was very vulnerable, somebody who was a child that was traumatized and not really loved. And, he sort of wanted to be this loving person for her. And also, I think he really wanted children and a family. And, she gave him 2 daughters. But, from her side, she was sort of, the way I experienced her was she was not really capable of really being there for the people in her life. And, I know this because I know part of this because, she wasn't really a mother for any of her daughters. 2 of her daughters were raised essentially by her oldest daughter, while, she was, she was absent for whatever, she had different things that went on, that made it perhaps convenient for her to not be there, to not show up. But, the question becomes, did she create those circumstances herself, sort of, I don't know, on a conscious level or unconscious level, so that she would be, able to be absent in that way? Because, that's sort of the way that immediately when I moved in, she like sort of created the circumstances for her to be able to excuse herself in a way that would not, raise eyebrows from other people. Because I think, and pardon me for any, pardon me for throwing my grandmother under the bus like this, but she was I think she was cunning like a fox, essentially, when it came to relationships and getting what she wanted. And she was emotionally not very mature. She was like this child that had never grown up. And so she was able to, create the circumstances that would, suit her needs, while also maintaining an image of being this person who's so magnanimous and, just a kind person in the community. And she's just, providing all this stuff for all these people, but, none of it is really anything that would be, something that would be personally difficult for her to give. All the things that she gave were sort of things that were easy for her to give, and so, my grandmother was sort of like, like the difference between a summer soldier and a winter soldier. She was a summer soldier, or a fair weather friend. She would be your friend when the weather is fair, but when the winter came and it was time to be a soldier in the dark, through the difficult period, then she would figure out a way of like, oh no, this is not, I don't want to do this. This is too difficult. I'm going to figure out a way of making it seem like I'm a good person while still, rejecting my responsibilities to my relationships, because I don't really want this. So, what I think would have been nice, we all have the things that we wish would happen, but it would have been better if from the beginning my grandmother was just honest and say, hey, I know you're supposed to love your grandchildren, but, I don't really feel that strongly about my grandson. I love him in my own way, but, I don't really care about what happens to him that much. So, let's not take on this responsibility, because it's not really what I want. So, I would have preferred that kind of honesty, because I don't actually mind people who are selfish. I think selfishness is fine, as long as we're not destroying someone else's self-esteem in this like long form strategy in order to avoid responsibility. And essentially this is sort of like what happened with my grandmother. She, instead of just being honest and saying, hey, I don't want to take care of this grandson who just lost his mother and needs a place and a family, I don't want to do that. I don't feel capable of doing that, and it makes me uncomfortable and insecure, and I just don't want to do it. So I'm sorry. I know it makes me a horrible person in some people's eyes, but I'm willing to accept that and deal with it, because what I want is actually just to continue going on vacations and being retired, and not really doing the difficult things in life that sometimes require some work. So yeah, she was not honest about this. She didn't say this truthfully, and because she had an appearance to maintain. She wanted her to be seen as this magnanimous person who is giving all this wonderful altruistic stuff to the people around her. But she gave of herself what was easy to give, essentially, and when it was difficult, then she was nowhere to be found. So what happened was I went to go live with them, and immediately it became clear that she didn't want this. And I spent a lot of my time just at other people's places for months and months. I was sent from one place to another, and not really knowing what the hell is going on in my life. Just lost my mother, sort of being tossed around, feeling like I'm being held out like a dirty sock. And then when I did spend time at my grandparents' place, my grandmother was never happy with me. She always found a reason to complain about me. She always made issues about little things that weren't a big deal. And, you know, I would have gone along with my grandmother so much. I would have, you know, acquiesced to her will. I would have gone along with what she did if she had actually wanted those things and had explained them to me from a place of love and a place of like, okay, my sweet darling grandson, this is why I need you to do this, because, you know, this will be good for you and it will be good for me. But, you know, it's not like she was really able to lower herself into my position. You know, she always approached every sort of conflict of interest between me and her as like a major imposition on her, and that I was just so ungrateful and so horrible. And, you know, she would say, you know, like, where's my wonderful grandson? Where did he disappear off to? You know, don't you, you know, want to do this to be a good grandson to your grandmother? And so she never really like made it clear, you know, why it was that she wanted what she wanted. She just sort of like threw it at me, and then sort of knowing that I think that it wouldn't work out well between the way she presented it, and because what she really wanted was not what she made explicit, but the implicit, you know, what she really wanted is just to go back to sleep walking through life, you know, with my grandfather. And, you know, the other thing is, I think she was very jealous of the way my grandfather loved me. And, you know, she sort of wanted, I think emotionally, she was, you know, my grandfather's first daughter, and she didn't want, you know, a brother in this relationship. So she wanted to, you know, essentially kick me out of the nest, you know, like, you know, many birds, you know, when they have more than one birds, I believe it's pelicans, when they have more than one bird, you know, one sibling, the stronger sibling, will kick the weaker sibling out of the nest. And then, you know, because, you know, there's only enough resources, you know, for, you know, the one bird. So, you know, essentially this is the way my grandmother treated me. She was in competition for the nest. She viewed it as a scarcity of resources, that, you know, there couldn't be enough love for her and me. So she made the situation impossible between me and her, while also ruining my self-esteem and, you know, complaining to everyone around that, you know, I was a horrible grandson, because it was convenient to see a child that acted out and yelled at his grandmother, you know, as a horrible, you know, human being, and as the, you know, the source of the problem, when really the source of the problem was that she just didn't want to do the grandmother thing. She didn't want to do the, you know, foster mother thing. She didn't want to take on a grandchild, and she didn't want to share, you know, my grandfather with her. So, you know, she made it so that every interaction between, you know, me and her was destined to turn into like a, you know, sort of a violent conflict of interest, where, you know, I would, you know, lose my temper, you know, over and over and over again, because she just was not, you know, coming at me from an honest place. And, you know, because I was a foolish child, and no one explained to me, like, hey, you know, this is sort of where I hold my grandfather responsible, is, you know, he sort of wanted to always be the nice guy, and he was always sort of, you know, sitting on the fence. He was a bit of a fence sitter, and he himself, you know, he was very good at love, but he was not very good sometimes at leadership. You know, what I wish he would have done is just come to me and say, hey, you know, your grandmother, she's a bit of an emotional child. I understand, you know, that she makes you angry, but don't take the bait with her, you know, because, you know, you're the one who's going to get kicked out, because she was here before you, and, you know, she's not going anywhere. The only person who's going to go somewhere if this doesn't go well is you, you know. And so what you need to do with your grandmother is you need to tolerate that, accept that she, is kind of full of crap, but just, go along with it. Don't let your ego get too wrapped up in, what if she's being authentic, or, if she's being reasonable. Just go along with it so that it can be, that you don't end up shooting yourself in the foot, because right now what you're doing is you're a sucker, and you're falling for this game, and you're losing at this game because your grandmother's been at this game for a long time, and you're only 8 years old. You have no idea what what you're playing, what you're up against. And so, I really love you and I want you to live with me, but that's not going to happen much longer if you keep exploding at your grandmother and losing your temper with her, and making everyone think that you are like this violent, crazy child that needs to go into foster care. So yeah, if my grandfather would have had a little bit more courage to just like be honest about the situation that we were in, and really had to step forward and said, hey, work it out with your grandmother. You don't have to like it, but if you want to live here, then you need to sort of deal with the reality of the situation. And I understand that your grandmother is difficult to deal with, but try to make peace with her. And you don't have to take everything that she says seriously. You don't have to. You can just go along with her to at least superficially. You don't have to. What's true in your heart won't change if you just pretend a little bit with your grandmother, because that is going to work out better for you in the end. Anyhow, so it was nothing was ever like, no conversation like this ever took place. I wish it did, because I'm sort of I'm a very like emotionally honest and authentic person, and when people tell me what sort of the truth is, and what is really expected of me from a place of where I can see that they actually have my well-being in mind, and they're not just trying to fuck with me, then I can pretty much tolerate any sort of nonsense, because I'm a very pragmatic person at heart, and I don't really need things to be perfect. I just need them to make sense. And when it just seemed like nothing made sense with my grandmother, I just freaked out and let her sort of have her way with me and make me look like like a problem child. So yeah, so I mean, that is essentially where I still want to forgive my grandmother, and I do forgive her more and more as I process these feelings more and more, and I just sort of re-examine this circumstance. Maybe if some of my family members are watching this and they're like thinking, well, this is not the way I experienced her, and like I don't think that's true. Well, it may not be true for you, or maybe you can see where I'm coming from, but the point of this is not really so much to say literally what is true, but to express where I'm at emotionally right now. So I hope you guys understand that and don't take it too personal that I'm like putting this out there, because essentially the reason I'm putting this out into the world is because I've really struggled with isolation in my life, and this is like one way for me to practice communication and to sort of open myself up as this is who I am, and the world doesn't need to like it, but I'm going to have the courage to go out there and say what is in my heart to the best of my ability, without I'm not trying to bring vengeance on anyone, or make anyone atone for anything that they did. I think, whatever it is, where people are, that's what they need to deal with, and that's where, they are, and then they have to sort of go with what they're at, with where they're at. So, that's what I'm doing, trying to be kind, in expressing my feelings, and trying to not bear false witness. I'm trying to be as honest as I can about the situation, but I do, feel like I did get thrown out into the wilderness by my grandmother, because, the place that I ended up with, because she wasn't, willing to take that responsibility, and because she sort of damaged my self-esteem, with this sort of deceptive strategy, rather than just saying, hey, I don't want you. It's left me in a great state of confusion, and I, went into, the harbor of, my father, essentially, who was not the best parent, but he was the only one who said, hey, I want you to come live with me. And I trusted that, because that was true, regardless of how good of a parent he turned out to be. At least he was honest about wanting me, and that meant more to me at the time than having a stable family environment, because I didn't want to be around people who are just like, oh, hey, we're being so nice to you, you better do what we tell you, because if you're not nice, then we're going to kick you out. So I think that was like the fear that was in the background of my mind, and that's why I chose my father over everyone else, because at least he made it clear that he wanted me, and his love was real. And in the end, the only truth, that a child is going to care about is, is the love that they sense from those around them. And so, I didn't sense, the love as strongly elsewhere. So I ended up, with my father. And, that's, my father is someone else who I struggle to forgive with, but it's made easier by the fact that he's still in the realm of the living. So, and I have a relationship with him now. And, I see, who he is and where he's coming from. And I see, him as a human being. With my grandmother, I know that she's a human being, and I'm sorry, that we couldn't have a better relationship, and that I didn't see through, your insecurities. You're sort of this person who was a child and who never grow up. And I'm sorry that I sort of reacted to you as if that was sincerely where you were, when I should have just sort of like let it roll off and not taken you serious, because I do think that you regretted, how things turned out between us. And even though, your heart wasn't in it, I think you still felt regret that, you weren't able to be a better grandmother to me than you were. And, that is not, I understand, that, why you did what you did, essentially. And, I can't say that I've forgiven you with all my heart. I still think about you, and you still piss me off. But I love you, even if you didn't show your love to me as much as I wish you had when you were alive. So, for all the, for the anger that I let come out in your direction when I was a boy, I am sorry for that. I should have been smarter for both of our sakes. But I do feel like you were greatly responsible for that anger, because, I was a boy. I was lost. My mother had died. My father was a bit of a maniac. And, it would have been better if you'd been a little bit less selfish and a little bit more responsible. So, but understand why you couldn't be that way. So, I forgive you as much as I can in this moment. I still, feel angry about it, but that doesn't mean that I don't understand, and that doesn't mean that I don't love you. And, wherever you are, I believe the soul is eternal. And, you know, I hope whatever wounds that you have with you, and, you know, wherever you are now, is that they're being healed, and that the things that, you know, need to be revealed to you in order for you to be a more integrated and happier soul that radiates light, you know, that you're getting that. You know, because we all end up sort of getting what we need, regardless of whether we can see it at the time. You know, I know the darkness very well, and I know that within the darkness is often, you know, where the treasure is. So anyhow, you know, I think I'll leave it here. I feel really good right now at this moment, having expressed all this. And you know, if you're somebody, you know, who's struggling with forgiveness and thinking about, you know, past circumstances, you know, I greatly encourage you to express it in some form or other, you know, whether it's journaling or just talking to yourself, or, you know, talking to somebody that will listen to you without interruption. You know, I would greatly encourage people to do that, because once you begin to understand, you know, the important relationships in your life that have been traumatic, you know, it opens up your heart. And when your heart is open, then you can really start flowing and going more for what you want in life. And, you know, you will begin to see opportunities where before you only saw difficulties. So again, I'll leave it here. You guys have a good one. You know, with love, I'll see you again soon.